Oh.
Parenting is an exceptionally optimistic thing to do. My hope is to create a creative, imaginative, explorative atmosphere for our child, but also just that space for all children.
I remember when one of my kids was still a baby, going to the playground, and they were dressed in kind of plaid clothing. And I bumped into somebody who hadn't met this baby yet, and they were really excited, and they asked if they could hold our baby. So I said yes, and they picked up kiddo and kind of holding them up like this and kind of jostling them and bouncing them and just like, oh, you're so strong and you're so big. And they, they had made an assumption about this kid's gender. And then I said something that then made them switch their assumption that this was a girl. And they took the baby and changed the way they were holding the baby into like a really gentle, cradling position. And the tone of their voice changed. The whole way that they engaged with this human being completely changed based on an assumption of gender. And that is happening all the time. And their whole way of being treated and experiencing of the world is shaped by the assumptions that we're making.
In my opinion, there's a relentless machine in society that we often label as the patriarchy. And I believe that this machine starts running right from a child's birth.
We wonder why we have such gender disparities in childhood, in adolescence, in adulthood. And I don't think it's a question. I think we look backwards at the way that we are dividing kids from birth. From the moment a child is born, they are sorted, they are color-coded, they are divided. Names, pronouns, how a child's room is decorated, what toys are purchased for that child, what clothes are purchased for that child.
So our immediate family is the two of us, our 2-year-old, and our dog.
Oh yeah.
When we were pregnant, we were constantly asked the question, what are you having? And we were disturbed with other people's obsession with this.
I just couldn't come to terms with the idea of assigning my child a gender, knowing full well that they could be trans or non-binary or gender diverse in any way. The moment a child enters this world, we hold them up and we say, it's a boy, it's a girl. And I think that says a lot about society's value of compulsory cisgenderism, that children must be cisgender to live happy, healthy lives. And we simply don't agree. You are like a case in point example of trans joy. And I want our child to have the potential to grow into themselves in all aspects of their identity and their gender identity and their gender expression.
We have 3 kids, an oldest, a middle, and a youngest.
I think initially when we became parents, we wanted to support our kids in surviving a world that has really intense gender stereotypes and can force us into pretty narrow boxes about who we are supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. So I think initially what we were really thinking about was those stereotypes can be harmful. How do we support our kids in not being affected by those as much as possible? And I think that has really evolved much more broadly about gender as a force that can be positive, but in a lot of places in our world can have really negative or harmful impact on people.
I really saw that there was like limited options in terms of the stereotypes or the expectations people had around if you were a girl, and limited options around what the expectations were if you were perceived to be a boy. And I wanted my kids to have all the options on both sides. And I'd say that evolution from seeing it as sort of as 2 different limited sets of limited options, and I wanted my kid to have all the options. The evolution turned into, oh, there's actually just like a huge spectrum and they can move through that spectrum. I want them to be able to move through that spectrum. And I'd say that that teaching a lot came from the kids or came from different experiences we had parenting.
That's a sun shirt.
Perfect, that's what we want. It'll protect you from the sun. It also is good at drying quickly.
We are currently pregnant and we are expecting our baby in about 4 weeks. We are super, super excited and super nervous about the journey to come.
Okay, you have to see this. My mom got this for me. Look at this cute little swimsuit.
Tiny.
I use they, them pronouns. And then we have little Taylor, who is 36 weeks now. And we're going to use they, them pronouns for them as well. Critique les politiques, pas les gens. Certaines personnes obtiennent plus et d'autres moins.
Gender-typical parenting usually restricts children to a fraction of their potential, especially if they identify as gender non-binary. And I didn't want that for our child.
The typical way of raising a kid is super binary. And knowing more, it doesn't make any sense to raise my kid in the binary way. I just want to give them the knowledge that I think one should have to be able to discover themselves. Practicing to breathe, they were saying.
Yeah.
I think. It's going to be nice for Taylor to look at this in a few years.
It's gonna be nice. And we're gonna add lots of photos, right?
Yeah.
From birth, we use they, them pronouns for our child. We felt of the pronouns, they were the least prescriptive and offered our child the most possibilities.
When our first two kids were born, we used pronouns with them kind of associated with their sex at birth, because our oldest taught us so much about kind of expansive gender, and we really started thinking more about pronouns and a much more open way of thinking about gender. By the time we had our third kid, then we were starting with neutral pronouns and kind of thinking more about giving even more space for them to kind of, come to their own gender identity without us imposing it on them.
Which in my memory, our oldest said, we need to do that. We don't know what their gender will be, so we need to be using neutral pronouns.
Oh, no, that too.
Can I have a big one? This one's a little one. Can I have a big one? So we knew we had to do gender differently.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. We found a book of a parent of a family that was raising their kid by not gendering them from birth and using they, them pronouns.
Love it.
The book provided us with a bit of a how, but how to inform others in your life. Like, we didn't know, we knew we had to do it, but immediately we're scared because it's like a coming out all over again.
Yeah. My brother said that we were talking to them once and they asked, like, did you find out the sex or something? Or are you going to share it? And we said, no, we're not going to share it. And we're not going to also after the baby is born.
And they said that they weren't surprised about that.
So I first learned about gender creative parenting. It was a very short video by Kyle Myers, just describing how they're raising their kid. And as soon as I saw it, to me was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And then they brought it up to him, and he was surprisingly really into it. At least I was surprised.
I still remember that day. It was an evening and I was sitting right here on the sofa, and Kate runs in from the bedroom and they show me their phone and they talk about this new parenting style and they try and explain it. And I go, that's interesting. Can we view more videos about it? And we saw a couple of videos of Dr. Kyle Myers, and 2 videos in, I was sold. It made so much sense to me.
For me, to define gender creative parenting, I would describe it as letting your child self-determine their own relationship to gender.
We don't want to share with anyone what their genitals look like. That includes people who are not used to using they, them pronouns with them. It also is all about the environment that we're setting Taylor in. What books we'll read to them, how we're going to dress them. We're going to use all the colors of the rainbow.
We try to create an environment that is very expansive in terms of books they're exposed to, toys they're exposed to. Their clothing is colorful and bright and has all kinds of things from comfortable, practical wear to like frilly, fun, pink colors. We work really hard to be conscious of the gender stereotypes, of undoing the gender stereotypes that are around in the world. We re-script books, we switch pronouns of characters to they, them pronouns, or if a book character is engaging in maybe more stereotypical boy things, we will switch that pronoun to a she, her pronoun.
Coloring.
It felt like we had kind of explored and learned and built a way of parenting that was responsive to our kids and the world around us and them. I think one of the biggest pieces is just trying to recognize that our kids are their own people, that they're on their own path. I think it's very easy when you become a parent to think about your child or your children as an extension of yourself, and that they're kind of a reflection of you and on your path. For me, that's kind of a central thing. It's just really recognizing that our kids have their own lives, they have their own path.
When Taylor is old enough to choose, we will respect their choice.
That's a big part of gender creative parenting. Yes, at first we'll somewhat impose stuff on them, but every parents do in some way, because you have to make decisions for your kid. But eventually, as soon as they can make their own decisions, we will let them do that. That's a big part of how we want to apply gender creative parenting, to let them lead the way.
If you would have asked me before I had kids about how much a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 10-year-old knows about themselves, I don't think I could have predicted how much they are capable of knowing about themselves if they're given the space to talk about it.
You know how people right now are using the phrase a lot, just let kids be kids? Ironically, that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to let our kid be themselves without prescribing all of the gendered nonsense that people often do kind of put on their kids before they can even walk and talk. And it's just, we're just trying to keep a space open for them to just be who they are.
1, 2, 3. I love you.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, let's go then.
When we first learned that one of our children would be using they, them pronouns or be identifying as non-binary, we predicted resistance along the way. And I remember at some point finding this book that was called Before the World Was Ready. And it was a number of different stories of different discoveries that had been happened over time that initially, when discovered, were met with a lot of resistance, like the fact that the Earth revolved around the sun. And all different ideas that are now so mainstream, it's hard for us to imagine that they were ever not acceptable. And I felt like that was a good framework to present to the kids as like a way of being like, not everyone understands this yet. It doesn't mean that they won't later. So I feel like a number of times having interactions with our kids where they would be like, well, they haven't learned about it yet, right, Mom?
I really like the sign that Jenna made.
I know, it's gonna be so perfect. After learning more about gender, it really made me rethink how I personally saw myself in this world. When I was younger, I never felt like I fitted in. Never. I was very depressed as a teenager and I was masking a lot. People didn't really know about it, but I didn't feel comfortable with myself. And I think it was really because I didn't know anything about gender or sexuality. And those are really big parts of who I am. And when I saw things about gender creative parenting, it made so much sense, because I thought, I wish I was raised that way because then I would have known about myself at an earlier age and maybe I wouldn't have been that depressed.
To the extent that it is possible as a parent, we wanted to not perpetuate sort of the harms done to ourselves to the best of our ability, to like not force our kid to be a certain way.
Yes, that is a spider. We have an element influence over their ability to feel like proud and confident in who they are, or to feel shame and like it's something to hide.
I think for me, a lot of my personal motivation, if I were to kind of analyze myself, is really thinking about, I had a childhood that was relatively typical in terms of learning to be a boy and learning to be a man. in that my emotions were discouraged, being tender, being nurturing, expressing feelings other than anger. Like those things were not encouraged in the world around me and in my life. And those things were really harmful, and they impacted my ability to have relationships that are healthy and nurturing and meaningful. And they impacted my own sense of well-being and like what I could explore in the world. I don't think my gender would be different, but my sense of self and just my understanding of what I could be and what it means to be a man, I think could have been very different. And so I at least wanted my kids to be able to feel like whatever gender they are is something that can be healthy, can be positive, can be something they can love and feel good about in the world.
And I think a big part of this parenting practice is also building critical thinking skills with our child. So having them recognize gender stereotypes and recognize gender socialization and think critically about those things. Think about which aspects of gender they want to take up and which aspects of gender they want to leave behind for them.
Also, I think that the framework isn't just about gender. It kind of lends itself and naturally permeates to other systems and structures that we're all sort of living in the confines of. And like you were saying, like, hope that we can foster critical thinking about just all of the systems that are putting us into boxes. At least question them. Yeah.
We have the capacity to step out of ourselves and look at the culture that we're saturated in. It gives us an opportunity to understand that it's just a culture or it's just one way of being right now. And that those things, I think, can apply to many of the different isms. To recognizing what your own culture is, what your own status quo is, allows you to say, oh, this is just the status quo right now around how we're treating people who have different skin color, or how we're treating people who have different genitalia or wearing different clothes. Or so just the capacity to step out of it and be like, oh, this is just the thing that we've created here, lends itself to opening more conversations.
I think the world definitely needs gender creative parenting. The binary world that we live in doesn't allow people to discover themselves to their full potential. And I think that's what gender creative parenting allows in children. They get the knowledge that they need to put words on how they're feeling and who they are. And I think that will just create a world where people have a better sense of who they are as a person.
Can you come and take a corner?
As they get older and they start like going to school, they're probably going to come home with stories of their lived experience of how kids are gendered, teachers, what people are saying, and how they're performing their gender. It'll become more a process of talking to them about these things.
You know, when our oldest came back from kindergarten and said, all the girls like purple and the boys don't like purple. And we would say, like, all the colors are for everybody. You know, colors don't have a specific gender. They're just colors in the world. But the evidence in the world, and they were already collecting evidence, right? At a very young age, they would say, like, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm observing. So, like, you can say your beliefs or philosophy, but, like, this is how it is in the world. And so that part of that for me also made me realize, like, how much am I personally reflecting my beliefs out into the world. So when I looked at my own clothing and color palette, right, it was pretty bland and pretty reflective of a more typically masculine way of expressing in our world. So it has made me challenge myself to think about, you know, am I actually expressing these values out into the world in the way that I'm telling them to my kids? Kids don't do what you say, they do what they see, and they do what you do. And so for me, that has been important to, like, continue to just learn and grow and reflect on.
I want to be a role model for our child. I want to show them that gender can be expansive and explorative and fun. So I need to live that myself, which has been, like, incredibly, incredibly freeing to have that self-compassionate lens on myself and who I am, and give myself the space to, like, experiment and unlearn all of the gender stereotypes that were put onto me. And it's tough. There's a lot of unlearning to do to parse out what qualities and personality traits and things that you enjoy and value are your own, and what things were told to you by society that you should value and become.
Should we go see Skylar?
Let's blow some bubbles.
I know some of the criticism of this kind of parenting is that it's like, it's an experiment and you're, you know, like, you don't know what you're doing to your kid and this hasn't been done before. And I just really ask parents to think about like all parenting is an experiment. You know, do you let your kids look at an iPad? Do you ever feed them fast food? Like, these are all new things that we weren't doing to kids before that are an experiment. And I don't profess to know what's the best thing or the best kind of parenting, or I don't think that exists. I don't think that knowledge exists. What we need is ways of giving all kids of all genders the resources and tools to navigate the world. And those include being nurturing, being kind, being emotionally connected to yourself, being able to form relationships with other people. And those are not tools that we've traditionally offered to all people of all genders. And I think they're important for everyone.
Oh, good.
I think the freedom and fun of of dressing them in colorful, silly outfits is like, that's rewarding. The playfulness. I feel like our general approach kind of lends itself well to playfulness and freedom of trying things.
Yeah, parenting
Like
this
that.
way is fun because there isn't rules. Right? It's fun.
Yeah. So put your shoes on.
Put your damn shoes on. People keep saying to us, like, why are you thinking about gender so much? That must be really hard to think about gender so much, but you're thinking about gender so much. You just don't even realize you're thinking about gender so much.
Okay, Sunny's turn.
Oh, you did it!
In our home, most of our lives do not revolve around gender. Our home and our everyday life has many passion projects, many activities. We do not sit around the table every night talking about gender. Gender is more of a lens, and then sometimes we step back and reflect on the fact that we are looking through a lens of gender, but it's not dinner conversation every night. It's just a piece of how we live.
We talk about soccer and whales and dolphins way more than we talk about gender in our house.
Yeah, and how spicy the food is.
Oh,
What
so
we put in the food.
why did we cook that food? It's way more popular conversations than gender, for sure.
Yeah.
This parenting philosophy gives me hope. And I feel like we live in a current place, at a current moment in time, with increased anti-2S LGBTQIA+ rhetoric and hate and laws being passed and policies being passed. And I want to create a world where anyone can identify in any way, shape, or form that best authentically represents them.
So I think some of the big problems that we're facing in the world, we need to try something new. And I think this is one way. If I'm only allowing the part of my brain to work that fits within the options that girls should be following, if I'm only using that half of my brain, like, I'm missing out on so much. And if we could all access the full range of emotions and possibilities, just think of like the creativity that we would be able to bring to just solving some of the world's biggest problems that we have right now.
For the future of gender creative parenting for our family, I foresee a lot of happiness, a lot of laughter, a lot of play, and us fighting hard to change the world for Taylor. In raising them, Dr. Kyle Myers mentions, the little ones are going to change our world. Don't we owe it to them to do the same for them? And that really resonates with me. I will fight tooth and nail, and I will do my best to make sure that Taylor gets the life they deserve.
Can you imagine how colorful and rich and expansive our world could be if more people took up the gender creative parenting approach and just encouraged their children to be curious about the world, curious about themselves, open-minded to diversity, and explore who they are? That's the kind of world that I want to live in.
My biggest concern with gender typical parenting is that it's limited. It's limiting a child to live a fraction of their potential.
And gender creative parenting is limitless. It's the opposite, which is wonderful.
Yeah, limitless.
It's just all about being able to be whoever you want to be. That's it. Be you, really.